podcast includes commentary and conversations about issues relevant to clinical psychology. It is intended to educate, entertain, and enlighten, and is not a substitute for actual mental health treatment. Individuals who share personally here choose willingly to tell their stories to benefit you, the listener. All other references to clinical situations are altered or limited to protect confidentiality. For more specific questions or help with a personal situation, please consult a local mental health professional. Therapy, mental health, real life. This is Psych Rally with Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist Dr. Martin Shaw.
So welcome back. We are on to what episode are we? 34 of Psych Rally. Thanks for tuning in. This podcast has been sort of on hiatus for some time for a number of reasons, mainly on my part. But I'm here together with two friends and colleagues here at a very, very important time, which we'll come back to. But basically, we got together to share some thoughts with folks and would love to interact with others who are listening in because in the next month, we are on to the upcoming and 8th and final season of... That's right. HBO's Game of Thrones, based on George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Very exciting. So, all right, cue music. We're just messing around here. So here to unpack some of this, there's so much rich psychology and interesting characters and storylines in the show, and that's why we just thought it'd be interesting to come together as therapists and mental health professionals to talk about all the things that we've seen so far. So here with me are two of my colleagues from our practice at CBT SoCal. On my right is Kristin Howard. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, specializing in all the things that we work with in our practice, OCD, anxiety, depression, etc. And she also works the rest of her time with the College Counseling Center at Loyola Marymount University. So welcome, Kristin.
Hello, everyone.
And to my left is Dr. Jason von Stietz. He's a postdoctoral psychologist with us in our Torrance office, and he also has a side specialty in sport and performance psychology, and works the rest of his time currently at the College Counseling Center at Whittier College. So welcome, Jason.
Hey, how's it going? I'm happy to be here.
All right, cool. So, we should probably say at the outset that obviously season 8 is pending, but we have all watched through the end of season 7. So this is sort of the spoiler alert warning in case anyone is listening that has not watched through season 7. And the books do not perfectly correspond with the show either, right? So wherever you're at in the books, just keep in mind, we're basically talking more about the show through the end of season. And a lot of interesting stuff has happened all the way back from season 1 through now. A lot of people have died, plenty of violence, lots of, steamy stuff and backstabbing and drama. So let me throw it out to the two of you. What are kind of some of the when somebody mentions Game of Thrones, like what are the scenes or the moments that really stick in your memory that are the most, moving or impacting or just stand out in your mind?
One of the big ones for me was definitely the beheading of Ned Stark.
Oh, ouch.
For me, that was huge because that was the first time that you really got to see just how ruthless Joffrey is and just what a vindictive, despicable person he is. And then just also thinking about Ned Stark's daughters and just all of the trauma of actually witnessing something like that and just how it was going to change their lives forever. That just really was a really intense scene for me.
Right. I absolutely agree. And also, as the viewer, it's also very traumatic because Ned, going into the show, we think that Ned is the main character. We think, of course he's going to get into danger, then he's going to escape. Obviously, that's how stories work. But then that doesn't happen. And George R.R. Martin kind of takes the rug out from underneath us. And I think it's traumatic for a lot of different reasons. Like Ned he's sort of the hero of the show up until that point, and he's sort of like he's like our father figure where you can trust him and you're safe with him.
He's the symbol of what's good,
right?
Well, what you want to believe in. You want to believe the universe is about Ned Starks,
right?
And
exactly.
Then that quickly ends very abruptly, right?
Right, exactly. He was this just ruler who the North loves, and then the bad guys win at that moment. And, the Lannisters, King Robert's gone, the Lannisters take control, and now we're just left thinking, like, Ned's not really dead, is he? But he's dead.
He's quite dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, so the arc of my interaction with the story was I started watching after, the show had been going on for a couple of years and I just never got around to it. And I said, well, I got to give this a shot. So I watched a few episodes and it didn't quite grab me initially. But so I got maybe kind of 5, 6, 7 episodes into season 1. And I kind of trailed off for about a couple of years before I came back to it. But the scene that stuck out to me that eventually I think got me back to watching it was, I think it was towards the end of episode 5 of season 1, and Ned Stark has come to Winterfell to be the Hand of the King, and he's fed up with all the corruption and incompetence. He says, I'm out of here. I'm going back to Winterfell. And so King Robert is just kind of like, oh, shoot, what do I do now? He's sitting at his desk with a goblet of wine, and then Cersei, his wife, comes in and just says, well, shoot, what are we going to do now? And obviously they've had daggers for each other they've been married 17 years. And this kind of organic, raw, real, vulnerable conversation happens between the two of them where, they said, well, what the heck is holding the 7 kingdoms together now? And Cersei says, I don't know, our marriage. And then King Robert has this big cackle and they laugh together. And it's like Cersei laughing already is just weird. But, she's laughing with her husband who... and then she asked about his infidelity, which was sort of not a secret, but they had just never talked about. And then she gets to this place where she says, I did feel something for you once, Robert. And, was it ever possible for us? Was there ever a moment where was there a chance that we could have been happy together? And he looks her straight in the eye and he says, no. Oh, right. Gosh, here's this woman who's so icy and you're like, well, she's got her reasons. And then he says, does that make you feel better or worse? And she says, it doesn't make me feel anything at all. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. And then she puts her glass of wine on the desk and then leaves. But it's just one of those, like, we work in our consultation rooms sometimes with couples, sometimes with spouses, partners, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, who are in relationships that sometimes are struggling or that have become distant and cold, and things get swept under the rug and not dealt with. And pretty soon, after years, it's like, who is this person? Right. And in some ways, it was so relatable. It was this is all past, dragons and swords. It was just two people in a failed marriage acknowledging it, being really real about it. And then I think back and recalling that scene now, and it's like, it's really true. The failure of their marriage is really so pivotal because if the Lannisters and the Baratheons have a happy union, Ned Stark doesn't have to get involved. There probably things run better in King's Landing, so it's not corrupt and broke and falling apart. And I guess you wouldn't have a book or a show, but it's really just true. Like that, it's so much pivots upon that moment and their marriage, which is a shambles. So. That scene always just stood out to me as really real.
Yeah, that's a great point, because out of all the shocking scenes in this show, I would not have picked that one, but like you're really right. There's so much going on in that scene that just kind of flies under the radar. So those are a lot of great points right there.
It's just very human. So
yeah, and just their acceptance of that dysfunction, and then just that was the start of demonstrating that they didn't really have any real loyalty towards each other at the end of it all. And I think that's what was the start of all of that and everything that occurred after.
Well, just the fact that they admit it to each other too. She's like, well, what's important to you? And he's just like, drinking. And obviously for her, she kind of rolls her eyes at him. It's just like a real couple that you could imagine today. So
right.
Any moments through the show to date that are just like the most painful, or like the face palm moments that you're just like, oh God, what were you thinking?
Well, for going back to that first question, I still have a moment that isn't quite a face palm moment, but it kind of is, I guess, in a sense. But for me, it's more just the shock. So in the season, there's or in all the seasons, there's so many shocking moments. Starting with episode 1 with Bran getting thrown out of a window, the scene about the couple, or Robert and Cersei you just mentioned, the Ned Stark dying, and then the Red Wedding, and there's so many shocking moments that you kind of feel like nothing can shock you, but
they find a way.
Yeah,
they find a way.
Exactly, they find a way. And so the shocking moment for me is the hold the door scene.
Oh,
yeah,
Hodor.
Exactly, and it's so shocking for so many reasons. And as I was watching it and trying to think about it from more of a psychological perspective, there's so much going on. So I think part of the reason why it's so shocking is because Hodor is just a character that we view as pretty much completely innocent, and Hodor. So there's also the idea of intersectionality that takes place. And I guess I should explain intersectionality too. I didn't
give the brief the brief synopsis. That's okay.
Sure. I don't have like a great textbook definition for it, but I think it's be like how our different identities kind of intersect and relate to, how the world perceives us in different ways. We might, face discrimination or oppression. And Hodor he has an intellectual disability. He's only able to say one word, Hodor. So he's not able to communicate in any other way verbally.
Which apparently then gets taken on as his name.
Right, exactly.
He can only say his name.
Yeah.
Which turns out to not actually be his name.
Right, his real name is like Wade or something,
William or something.
Something like that. But people just call him Hodor, so like that becomes his whole identity, that word. And then he's small folk, so he's essentially a peasant. He's in the servant class. He has very little. Yeah, I don't think he has any money. And Bran, who also, he also has a disability, but he's a highborn. He has a lot of money. He has a lot of social status. And Bran wargs or like enters the body of Hodor, and it's usually like for a good purpose, to protect them, to protect the group, to help Bran, who doesn't have the use of his legs. But from the books, we know that Hodor does not like being warged into. It's frightening for him. It like overtakes his body, and he's scared. So like when Bran wargs into him, Hodor is also in there frightened and not liking that someone else is controlling his body. So there's a lot of issues at play, and I think one of the things that makes it so shocking and painful is sort of Bran, who's also innocent in many ways, like, kind of has this privilege where he's able to warg into Hodor, and he's able to even just command Hodor when he's not warging into him, just, because he's highborn. And Bran makes a careless mistake. He's kind of, he's not really thinking about the consequences. He goes out into, the world and runs into the Night King, and then kind of carelessly gets touched by the Night King. And then because of Bran not really thinking, he ends up getting Hodor killed. He ends up getting the Three-Eyed Raven killed. The Children of the Forest, as far as we know, are wiped out now, or at least their last stronghold is no longer present. So like all of these things take place because Bran, who we also love, was kind of careless, and Hodor sacrificed himself. And so for me, that was a very shocking moment, and I don't hold anything against Bran, but that his actions led to a lot of terrible things happening.
If you did hold anything against Bran, he would know it.
He would know it. Yeah. Bran knows everything.
Yeah. No, it was a really well done scene how they like zoomed back to the kid, and then they melded those two scenes together. Hold the door.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and you just love him because he's this big gentle giant. So, yeah. Ooh, good thoughts. So, disappointments, face palms. For me, it's first of all, I think just so Littlefinger gets taken out at the end of season 7, and part of me was thinking at the end, it's like, wow, like that's a huge character gone here. At the same time, I was like, how the heck did this guy last this long? Because he's just scheming and manipulating and lying and turning people against each other. And then I was thinking, it's really Sansa's fault. She just kind of enables him this whole time. So a little bit of face palming goes for Sansa, but I guess she's come to her senses. Better late than never. And then the other one is just for me, Stannis Baratheon. He's a character I never kind of quite got into because he's a little muted personality.
Right.
But when he goes along with Melisandre's, spell and says, "Oh, if you want to win, you gotta sacrifice your daughter." Oh man, that scene is just. And then the mother obviously she takes her own life because it's just and it obviously doesn't even work. So that's a painful one for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I would piggyback on the Sansa stuff. For sure, there were some things that Sansa did throughout multiple seasons that kind of got to me. So one of them was when the Hound tried to take her. That was the first time that she could have left. And then the second time was Brienne. And both times she was like, no, I'm just going to stay put. And then she just ended up having all of these traumatic experiences as a result of not really thinking things through. Also, Ned Stark, when he revealed to Cersei that he knew about the incest.
Might have want to kept that to yourself a little longer.
And it was like he was trying to be a good guy, to a certain extent, because he was trying to protect her and her children. Because he didn't want Robert Baratheon to kill them all, but then at the same time,
Yikes,
she's ruthless. And I don't know if he just underestimated her and didn't realize just how ruthless.
Right.
In the books, it explains a little bit more because you can get into Ned's head through the narrator. And Ned was really traumatized by the killing of the Targaryen children. He saw that as despicable. He didn't like that. And I think there was even a split between him and Robert after that. And then he left King's Landing when he found out. And he then went to go find his sister at the Tower of Joy and all that stuff. But I think Ned just really did not like that, and he didn't want that to happen again, which could have happened. I don't know if it would have, but it could have happened. And, Ned was trying to do the right thing, and that was just a bad outcome for him.
And it backfired. But, and I know Cersei didn't intend for him to get beheaded. That was more so Joffrey, but still... It just didn't end up working out for him. So it's kind of sad.
And then, let's see. So from my facepalm moments, well, actually going back to King Stannis and Shireen, that was definitely a heartbreaking moment for me. And I think...
I'm still wincing as you're talking about it. Man. It's awful.
I know. And I think a part of what makes that so painful is earlier in the season, I think it was that same season, there was that amazing scene, which is one of my favorite scenes ever in the show, where Shireen is talking to Stannis, her dad, and I forget exactly how it starts. She's kind of bored and just playing in his room, in the office that he's using. And then she starts opening up to him about just, I think the pain she goes through or something like that. And then he told the story of her birth and how she got the sickness that she had, and how everybody advised him to just send her away to an island to die. And he said, no, I didn't stop until you were healthy because you are my daughter. You are the Princess Shireen. And that's one of my all-time favorite scenes. Ooh. And it was so touching. And then...
sets it up, and then he has her burn at the stake.
Yeah, then he lets that woman seduce him.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Exactly.
Come on. I felt for Shireen, too, because I was kind of attached to her, too, because, here's this girl who's, again, relatively highborn. She's Stannis' daughter, but she's living in captivity.
Right.
As she's sort of hidden because out of shame or something. But actually, one of my favorite characters is Sir Davos, the Onion Knight.
Him.
Yeah, there's just something. He's a scrappy guy, but there's something kind of upright about him at the same time. And then they kind of form this unlikely friendship, and she teaches him how to read, and it's just something very sweet and endearing.
Right.
This little girl in captivity with a scar on her face, teaching this grown man how to read,
right?
Who is a former smuggler, and then anyway,
yeah.
So
I love Sir Davos. He's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, he's awesome.
So when him and Jon teamed up, I was very happy about that. I love that.
The dream team, huh?
Yeah. Then my biggest facepalm moment, it's kind of a small scene, and I think most people don't care about it, but when Jon bends the knee to Daenerys at the end of the last season, for me, I was just disappointed. I did see it coming eventually, but the way it was handled, he didn't need to bend the knee. I think she was even saying, "I'm going to help you to win this war," so he could have just said, "Cool," and then instead of just agreeing to accept her help, he right there bends the knee. And I think a lot of people think that it was actually in character for Jon. I don't think so. I think it was out of character. Going back to Jon being with the wildlings, he had a very close relationship with those wildlings, with Tormund and with Ygritte, who was the love of his life. I think his relationship with them was much closer than it is with Daenerys. And
so far. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, she is his aunt, so they have that.
Hey, well, hold on.
They have a little bit more than just.
They don't know that yet. Yeah. We know that. They don't know that.
Yeah.
They got quite close.
Yeah. Right.
Season 7.
Yeah. But with the wildlings, he related to the wildlings. He accepted a lot of their values. He accepted a lot of their ways of life. He formed close bonds with them. But then he continued to keep this bigger picture in mind of, I need to follow my vows. I need to maintain these Stark values and these Brothers of the Night's Watch values. And I'm here on a mission. My mission is to protect the wall and protect the realm. So he never bent the knee really to the wildlings and accepted them as his leaders. And then when he does that with Daenerys, it
didn't feel right.
Yeah, it would have been like if Jon said to Ygritte, "Okay, yeah, let's go run away together," and that just wouldn't have happened.
Could be. Although I'm thinking, this. He's probably also at the same time thinking like he really at this point, knowing about the White Walkers and seeing this, Daenerys, the momentum she has. She's now crossed the narrow sea. Right. And is, she has the Dothraki army and 2 dragons behind her. Right. He's like, yeah, and they kind of have a thing for each other. Maybe there's multiple reasons motivating him that weren't there with the wildlings.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is he saw her like, she's the real deal.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, when he bent the knee, was that before or after she saved everybody?
I believe it was immediately after.
Okay.
Immediately after he was in bed with wounds and all that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I 100% understand like having that alliance, but I'm pretty sure in that scene she says, "I'm going to help you." And so he already got everything he needed in the big picture. And then
maybe the kneeling just becomes symbolic, like, or you said you'd help me, so I'll kneel just to show. I don't know. Who knows? So what do you two think about Jaime Lannister at this point? Because I think his arc is interesting, and he's obviously so central from the beginning. And now at the end of season 7, him and Cersei kind of have a bit of some friction there. So have we warmed to him, or do we still just see him as the evil, griping Kingslayer from the beginning?
I think overall the seasons, I think he's definitely had a lot of humbling experiences.
Losing a hand.
Yeah, exactly. Losing a hand. Yeah. So I think maybe had he not had those experiences, he could be still aligned with Cersei. But I think he's had so many experiences, and with Brienne, that I think he's a different person, and he sees things in a different way now.
Okay. So you've warmed to him.
I've warmed to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I really like Jaime Lannister, and I think he's not necessarily my favorite character, but I think in a lot of ways he's George R.R. Martin's masterpiece as far as just a story arc, just a well-written character. Because in the very first time we see him, or shortly after we see him, he pushes a small child out of a window. So starting at that point, there's a lot of reasons to hate him. But over the course of the show, somehow we end up really liking him. So I think that's a testament to just how great George R.R. Martin is as a writer. And thinking about psychology and how that ties into Jaime, I think there's a couple things at play. One, when we first see Jaime, he's literally a knight in shining armor. He's got long flowing blonde hair and golden armor and a cape, a white cape. And so we immediately, because of something called the halo effect, where when someone has a few good qualities or is, nice to look at, we think they have lots of other good qualities. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what happens with Jaime. We assume that he's going to be, a great guy, a hero, a dashing knight, but that's just not how George R.R. Martin writes characters. So we start out and he's a Lannister. He's one of the bad guys. So I'm not a social psychology expert, but we know just in general, if someone's in our group, in an in-group, then we kind of like them or we view them positively. And if they're in an out-group, then we view them less positively or even negative. So Jaime is a Lannister. He's an out-group. He pushed a small child out of a window. He has interesting relationships with his sister. And so...
Interesting relationship.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So he's out-group. And then through the course of the show, he slowly starts to turn into an in-group person where... he gets paired up with Brienne, and at first they don't like each other. Slowly they form a bond, and Brienne is, we consider her a good guy, and then slowly...
Good woman.
Good lady.
Yes.
Yeah. And then slowly over the course of the show, he sort of as a viewer, you kind of relate to him, and he becomes an in-group member. So, and I think that's part of it, and it's a really great character in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's set up to go through the journey, as both of you said, where he's just pure evil at the beginning, and then slowly you start to see him differently until you get to the end where he's like, oh, Cersei, I'm going to dare you to order the mountain to kill me, and no, I don't believe you, and I'm out of here. It's weird thinking back at this point for me, because I was actually thinking there's a part of me that doesn't quite buy the Jaime transition, though. And I think some of the scenes that stood out to me is like he has such a soft spot for Tyrion. So much so that he will even go behind his father and his sister's back to set Tyrion free when he's going to be sentenced to death. Yeah. And that's a big risk for him to take. Cersei even knows he did it. And yet he kind of collaborates with Varys to get Tyrion out. And they embrace and have this goodbye hug thing. They may not ever see each other again. And so there's a real kind of sweet brotherly tenderness there. And you see the vulnerability that he opens up with Brienne. And it's I don't know, there's a little part of me that's just, it's so far a mismatch seeing that from, the Kingslayer who always looks like he's pissed at season 1 and is just like angry all the time and stabs Ned Stark in the leg and pushes Bran out the tower and then, forcefully violates his sister in front of their child's dead body. Part of me is like, I can't quite see this as one congruent person, but I'm definitely intrigued by him. That's why that'd be interesting to talk about him, because he's multifaceted, put it that way.
But then again, I think all of the characters are in their own way.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel
they've all done some pretty horrible things.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Had their moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind that, this conversation reminds me about is in social psychology, there's the idea of the fundamental attribution error.
Oh, yeah.
Where, if you do something, then you think, oh, well, obviously it was because of the situation. It was because I needed to do it. If someone else does something, then you attribute it to them and you think, oh, well, that's a bad person. That's someone who, is careless or, whatever. So thinking about Jaime, he didn't have the privilege of being born into the Stark house. He was born into the Lannisters. And Jaime, you can see he tries to do the right thing in many situations. He's kind of doing the best he can. So he's called the Kingslayer because he killed the Mad King who he vowed to protect, but was also, he was a mass murderer in many ways. And so
he was mad.
Yeah, he was mad. He was a mad king. So Jaime killing him was a good thing for the big picture. And he said, when somebody asks him how many lives have you saved, he says 500,000, the population of King's Landing. So Jaime, Jaime's doing the best he can, and he often makes mistakes or things don't turn out the way he was hoping.
I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the theme of gender and sex. I mean, there's a lot of debate out there about, the gratuitous sex scenes and nudity and some pretty, violent scenes towards women. At the same time, obviously, you have some very strong, leading, ruthless female characters in the show. So I'm curious, from either of your perspectives, does it feel like, no, that it just, despite that, we just give more weight to the ridiculous treatment of women by the Dothraki and other cultures, or do we emphasize more the fact that there's so many strong women characters in the show?
I think I have mixed feelings about it, because at some points it does seem like they're being objectified, but I think with a lot of the female characters, they actually evolved a lot throughout the seasons as well. And so there is always this sexual component, but then in a lot of ways, that's how they get their way, which is also kind of interesting, because I know with Cersei, definitely that has happened with Jaime Lannister and with her cousin, and a lot of people that she's been able to seduce and manipulate. Even Daenerys, even when she was married to, was it Drogo, or am I
Khal Drogo, right?
Khal Drogo. Yeah. And at first she was intimidated by him, and then she learned how to seduce him, and she became stronger. And even Sansa, she was objectified at one point, but through going through these experiences, it made her stronger. And now we see her being more fearless in the more recent seasons. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
There's maybe a redemptive or evolutionary aspect to these women who have been objectified or sexualized or even denigrated, but that they harness that for strength and development later.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones world is very brutal. It's not kind to people who don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of power, or aren't able to fight, aren't really good at fighting. But there are examples of women who are empowered. Usually they're very good at fighting, or they're very rich. The person that comes to mind for me is Ygritte, the wildling or the free folk person who ends up in love with Jon, and they end up bonding. So if you think about the wildling society, or the free folks, they have a much more egalitarian society where they don't have one king, and when they do, Mance Rayder or whatever his name is, he's the king because they agreed to it, they decided, and they don't bend the knee. They follow him because it's in all of their best interest. Ygritte was able to decide who she wants to be with, Jon, and there was some pushback from her society, but in the end, she would just assert herself, and everybody accepted it, whether they liked it or not. And there's this really great scene, the scene that I like, where Jon and Ygritte have already climbed the wall, and they're heading to Castle Black to attack it, because Jon is sort of undercover at that moment. And Ygritte says, they're talking about the battle, and Jon stops her and says, "Listen, if you try to attack the Castle Black, you're going to die. Everybody, all the free folk are going to die because you're not trained well enough." And then Ygritte's response is something like, "Yes, we might die, but just remember, you're mine and I'm yours, and we might die, but first we'll live."
Ooh.
And I thought that was so powerful for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons was that Ygritte is this empowered character who gets to decide who her mate is. She gets to decide what to do with her life. Before Jon and Ygritte climbed the wall, which is 700 feet tall, Jon said, "Aren't you scared?" And she said, "Yes, I am scared, but I've also waited my entire life to do this." So just when I think about those things, I feel like there is a place in Game of Thrones for empowered women.
Yeah, she's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
And the actress is Kit Harington's wife in real life,
yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
That's right.
So they met in the cave, and then both on set and in real life really hit it off.
Sadly, I was not invited, but that's okay.
Actually, wasn't she in Downton Abbey too, that actress?
I don't know.
The one that played Ygritte?
Yeah, that actress. She was in early on, and anyways, that's a very...
I might have to go back.
You want to go back to Downton Abbey?
love
We'll have to do
Downton
another podcast about Downton Abbey.
Nice.
I think similarly, it's... I kind of feel like the two go hand in hand, is that it's the brutality and the violation and the objectification of women in some aspects of the show. I feel like, I hate to say that it's necessary, because like, when is that ever necessary? But just from a creative sort of storytelling standpoint, it does kind of help as a viewer. It sets up and emphasizes how much more incredible and awesome it is that you have Brienne of Tarth and Ygritte and Arya, who's not afraid of anything from being a kid, seeing her... I don't know how old she's supposed to be when she sees her father beheaded in public. Yeah. And she just, is, you could argue, one of the toughest characters in the whole show, and would just never kind of fit the stereotypical traditional mold of what a young girl was supposed to be, knitting and stuff, Right. That was sort of more her older sister's take. And, Cersei's not afraid of anything, right? So I just think, especially in the era that we're in, it's I'm not sure how much of that is in the mind of the author or the people telling the show, I guess at some level, but I just think it's pretty awesome. If you think, if you think right now, it's, okay, I guess Jon Snow, but it's Daenerys, and it's Cersei, and it's Sansa and Arya and Bran up at Winterfell. So these are all the women in charge at this point, leading into the last season. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So I don't know if it should be inspiring for women and young girls to see, oh, Cersei Lannister, like us. Yes, women empowerment.
Yeah, and let's just seduce men, and then we can rule the world. It's not a good message, but it worked out in the show. So.
I guess. So we all kind of, the three of us all kind of picked specific characters to kind of delve into a little bit more and talk about from a kind of therapy, psychology standpoint, and going a little bit more deeper other than what we've already been saying. So who would like to start and kind of reflect on their character?
Okay. So I picked Jon Snow. So I am passionate about sports psychology. That's my thing. And Jon is pretty much an elite performer. He's an amazing soldier. He keeps getting into fights and he keeps winning. So I wanted to look at him from that sports psychology perspective. And going back, there's so much info there. It's so great going back to season 1 and watching his story arc. And so our first scene of Jon is him being a supportive brother. Bran and Arya, I think, are practicing archery, and Jon is there kind of smiling and mentoring them. And Lady Stark looks down at him, just glares at him, just hates him. So that kind of gives us some insight into what it was like for Jon growing up. So Jon has, a father figure in Ned, maybe a dad or an uncle or whatever you want to call him. And Ned is, he's a lot of people's favorite character. He's a lot of people's favorite father figure, where he's honorable and just, and he upholds these Stark values. And so Jon is sort of expected to live up to those standards. And then at the same time, he has this mother figure who never stops hating him and just glares at him and is very cold. So Jon is raised to meet these very high, stark expectations while also being hated and feeling very uncomfortable at all times. So that ended up working out great for Jon as far as his performance. So he's able to live up to these high standards, feel really uncomfortable, feel scrutinized at all times, feel hated, and just keep doing his best. And some of the things that stood out to me were all along the way, starting at the very first episodes, Jon keeps meeting people who want to give him advice. And maybe that's luck or privilege. That privilege is part of it, but also he's a good listener. He's a good student. And even when Jaime Lannister or Tyrion Lannister come up to him and first insult him and then give him some advice, he doesn't insult them back for the most part, and he hears the advice and he listens, and we can assume that he continues to learn from it. So a couple examples. When Tyrion is on the road with Jon, they're talking about why Tyrion reads a lot, and Tyrion says, "Look at me, what do you see? You see a dwarf. And what do I have? Do I have a sword? No, I have my mind, and a mind needs a book the way a sword needs a whetstone." And, that's one example. And all along the way, Jon just keeps getting all these great tidbits that help Jon to be a great soldier, to be a great performer. He even has a moment with Alliser Thorne, who ends up killing him. And even then, Alliser offers him some advice, and Jon takes it. So at the wall, before they have the battle where 100 wildlings attack, 100,000 wildlings attack Castle Black, Alliser says to Jon, "Do you know what being a leader is? A leader is having to make decisions when every little, whatever he says is second guessing you the entire time. And if you start second guessing yourself, then you're dead, and all the people who follow you are dead." And then Jon could have stuck it to Alliser, saying, "I was right about this and that," but instead he takes the advice and and accepts it, and then probably takes it into account when he makes decisions. So
he's very teachable, in other words. Yeah, he's coachable.
He's very coachable.
Yeah.
He's very coachable. And then now to talk about just a couple of his performances as an athlete or as a soldier, as a warrior. So there's one of my favorite episodes in Hard Home. It's an episode called Hard Home, where there's a big battle with a bunch of zombies. I think they're called whites, and the White Walkers. And Jon gets into a fight with a big bad White Walker, and Jon, the White Walker slams Jon in the chest, and Jon falls down off of a higher floor onto the ground, and he gets the wind just completely knocked out of him, and Jon can't breathe, and he's suffocated, but he still is focused on what he needs to do. So he's very uncomfortable physically. He can barely breathe, but he still knows, he still has his wherewithal with him, and he looks for Longclaw, his sword, and then he finds it, and he's smart enough to run away, and he runs outside the building, and then he falls down, and then he gets up, and he can't even breathe, but he still gets into a stance. And then the White Walker comes, and then Jon takes him out. And that was great for a lot of reasons, because Jon can barely breathe, but instead of struggling to try to breathe, instead of panicking, he just keeps his mind on his task. And it kind of reminds me of what we do in the office, exposure and response prevention, where somebody feels very anxious and uncomfortable with certain physical sensations, like being unable to breathe. So what we do is we have them hyperventilate or hold their breath, and then now they just have to deal with that physical sensation, deal with having difficulty breathing, and just allow themselves to feel anxious in order to habituate and get used to it. And it makes me think that Jon went through exposure and response prevention, where where maybe someone would slam him in the chest, or maybe he would just hold his breath for a minute and be unable to breathe, and he would still need to find his sword, his Valyrian steel sword, and get into a stance, and then be able to defend himself, even without being able to breathe fully and feeling very physically uncomfortable.
Yeah. It makes me think of committed action, something we talk about in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, that even in the spite of unwanted physical sensations, thoughts, feelings, what can we do? Well, what is our sort of North Star or guiding principle or goal that we need to accomplish? So he was able to have presence of mind, even in spite of discomfort and adversity.
Right, exactly. And that reminds me, I'll finish up real quick with this last point. So then in the Battle of the Bastards, Jon rides out into the middle of the field to try to save his little brother, Rickon. And then you could say that was foolish and not good sports psychology right there. But there he is in the middle of the field, and his brother's dead. And he sees an entire, I don't even know what to call it, an entire just row of knights charging at him. And in that moment, he, instead of panicking, instead of, wishing he didn't run out there, he looks out to the field, sees all those knights riding towards him. He accepts the moment. And I'm also not even adding anything. This is what he does. He takes a deep breath, and then he focuses and gets into a stance and is just ready to fight. And then that reminds me of mindfulness. That reminds me of committed action, like you just mentioned. He wasn't struggling against the moment. He wasn't up in his head. He took a deep breath. He picked up his sword, and then he was ready to go. And he just accepted whatever was going to happen.
He did the mental preparation.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking too, as you said, he's an elite performer, if you will, especially under pressure situations, and yet he was a bastard. He was raised. He knew his place. He was humble because his mother figure had daggers for him, and he knew he was a bastard. Yeah. And in some ways, as you said, that helped him. Perhaps he'd be more teachable and humble, and he's not arrogant. So I almost think in modern day terms, like he's someone who gets undrafted, doesn't come from a big name school to play college basketball or football or whatever, but somehow there's a diamond in the rough, and someone pulls him up to fill in, and ends up being a superstar in the NFL. I was going to say Tom Brady, but I'm not. I'll just leave it there. Sure. And then we find out he technically is a highborn, just nobody knows it.
Right, he's the true heir to the throne right now.
Yes, except only Bran and Samwell Tarly and the three of us know that. So no, cool, interesting. It's a rich character.
So I did mine on Cersei, and so I did it from a case conceptualization CBT approach. So I broke it down under relevant childhood data, core beliefs, conditional assumptions, compensatory strategies, and then some situations that stood out that go along with all of the conceptualization I came up with. So in thinking about relevant childhood data, so this is collected from both the television episodes and also the books. So one thing that I gathered from that information is that she was actually the firstborn, even though her and Jaime are twins. So she was the firstborn, and as she was actually coming out of the womb, Jaime was actually holding onto her foot. And so that shows how they were somewhat attached.
They were attached
from the beginning, but also maybe shows some of how she's kind of thought of herself as kind of this fearless leader in a sense, or always wanting to have that power and control. Also, her and Cersei and Jaime began experimenting sexually at a young age, so around 3 or 4 years old. And one of the servants told the mother about it, and so the mother had them separated so they wouldn't be sleeping together anymore, so she could have developed a sense of shame from that experience. And so then she also had a another traumatic experience, because you can consider that also being separated as somewhat traumatic, where her mother died giving birth to her younger brother Tyrion. And so that's how she developed the negative feelings towards him. And then
father didn't help either.
And then her father, he was away as the hand of the Mad King. And so there's also this abandonment happening where she was pretty much raised by servants because her mother is now dead, and then she's being cared for by these servants. And then there was another event that happened during her childhood when she was 15 years old, which you'll see on the show, where she spoke to a witch who informed her that she would have 3 children and that Robert would have 20 children, which she was kind of confused by, but that her 3 children would end up dying some way. And then she also informed her that there would be a younger king, more beautiful queen, I should say, that would come and take her place. And I think this came from the book, is that a younger brother would end up killing her. Ooh. So some of these things, some of these things have already happened. So if you've seen up until season 7, then you know that all of her children are now dead. And then, you know, we'll see what happens. I don't know if it was Marjorie that was the beautiful queen that took over, or maybe Daenerys. I mean, it's hard to say.
Sansa.
What they mean, but yeah, it could be Sansa. So we'll see
Mrs.
what happens. Yeah. Some of the core beliefs that I'm thinking Cersei may have developed is that others will abandon her. So as I mentioned, just the abandonment of, you know, her father not being there for her, and maybe always really wanting his love, but he wasn't there for her. And then also maybe developing a sense of being a shameful person because of sexually experimenting with Jaime and being separated. So she could have developed a feeling of shame. But also, you know, being the firstborn and you know, Jaime holding on to her, she might have developed an idea of being somewhat of a fearless leader in a sense. But she also developed an idea that others can't be trusted, which I think maybe can come from the whole Tyrion thing, and, you know, feeling like he was the cause of her mother's death. Some assumptions that I came up with is that she has this idea that if I make threats and evoke fear, I'll more than likely get my way, which you see throughout all of the episodes. She does that time and time again, where she manipulates people to get her way. If I get close to someone, I'll probably lose them because that's something that's happened to her many times over and continues to happen to her. If people know my secrets, they'll think less of me. So her holding in that secret of her and Jaime's relationship and the incest and really not wanting anybody to know about that. And then some of the compensatory strategies are, you know, seducing men to get what she wants. So seducing Jaime, seducing her cousin in order to get her needs met. And then also if there's a threat against me or my children, then I have to get rid of the source of that threat. So just developing that idea that she always has to get rid of people that are a threat to her. And then just using sex as a form of comfort, I think, too. And then I know at a certain point she was drinking a lot. That seems to be a theme, though, for a lot of people in the show.
She is a drinker.
A lot of drinking wine. So I know that, I guess, in the books it had said that she even gained a lot of weight at a certain point after, you know, losing, I don't know if it was right after losing Joffrey, but obviously just losing all of her children would, you know, self-medicating. So I came up with a few situations where, you know, some of these core beliefs kind of played out. So when Tyrion was acting as the hand, you know, to Joffrey, I think her automatic thought would have been that she doesn't trust him because she never really has trusted him, never has developed a reason to trust him. And then the meaning would be that I can never trust him because he killed my mother. And so that thought is always in the back of her mind, thinking that she can never really trust Tyrion fully. And then the emotion, I think anger, and then seducing her cousin Lancel in order to, inform her about everything that Tyrion is doing, you know, just because she doesn't have that trust. And so she always has to have somebody informing her of what's going on. And then another situation is Ned Stark revealing that he knows about the incest. And so her automatic thought is he's threatening, the safety of me and my children and my reputation and the heirs to the throne. So all of these thoughts maybe were going through her mind of potential threats to her. And then the meaning is that she could lose everything that means the most to her. Because when you think about it, her children were the most important thing. That's what she really cared about the most. And so the emotion is fear. And then the behavior is charging Ned Stark with going against Joffrey. So that's how she retaliated. Yeah. And so then another situation was Marjorie gaining more control over her son, Tommen. And also her not having as much power. So Marjorie gaining more power as a queen. And, power is so important to Cersei. And so her automatic thought is, I can't allow her to have this much power, and control over my son. And so the meaning is she's taking away my only living child and my power. So two things that she felt she was taking away from her. So she was feeling jealousy, anger, fear. And so her behavior is meeting with the High Sparrow to punish Marjorie's brother for being homosexual, and then sending Marjorie to prison, as we know, ended up backfiring on Cersei because then the High Sparrow ends up obviously going against her as well. And it's just this ripple effect is, by her trying to have all this control and this fear of abandonment, it ends up backfiring, and then she ends up losing Tommen as a result in the end also. And then, as you know from season 7, then she loses Jaime. So now she's all alone, even though she was trying to have this power. So
that, to jump in for a second, that actually reminds me of a really great scene where Tyrion and Cersei are actually just having a heartfelt moment with each other. They're just drinking wine and talking, and I think it's after the Red Wedding at some point. And they're both kind of depressed, kind of just, reaching out to each other. And then I think Tyrion says something like, how long are we going to have to keep doing these things? Like killing people, doing things like the Red Wedding, like that kind of thing. And then I think Cersei says, until all of our enemies are dealt with. And Tyrion says, but it's every time we deal with an enemy, we get 2 more. So, and then Cersei goes, well, I guess we'll be doing this for quite a long time. And
it's just become a natural way of her functioning for her, and
that's all she knows.
Yeah, that's all she knows. Yeah. So I saw some, different diagnosis traits. I think she could have be suffering from a little bit of PTSD, but that's not completely clear. But
who
narcissistic
would not have PTSD?
I know, right? Everybody
who would not.
Exactly. Some narcissistic personality disorder. She obviously has some traits, some antisocial personality disorder, just because of all the killings and not demonstrating any sort of remorse, any sort of, empathy. Or any of that. So, yeah, she would be a tough case to have. I wouldn't even know where to begin with her. I mean, it would just be breaking down, I think, a lot of those core beliefs that she developed from her childhood. And so really getting her to be vulnerable, which I think you see moments of that throughout the episodes. So seeing if I could really go there with her and breaking down maybe some of those cognitive distortions.
Assuming she was ever motivated.
Yeah, exactly. But if it's full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, she might not be the most motivated. So
well, she's got power right now, I guess. So.
Yeah, exactly. So she's kind of in a happy place. She just doesn't have anybody around anymore that she really cares about. So that might play out.
Other than her unborn child.
Yeah, the unborn child. Oh, I forgot about the unborn child. That's right.
Yeah. The witch didn't see that in her vision.
Yeah, she didn't.
I don't know what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
If you can't trust a witch, who can you trust?
That's what I always say. Burned by too many witches at this point in my life. I wanted to share some thoughts about Theon Greyjoy of the Ironborn.
Yeah.
boy, I mean, obviously what stands out most to him is just the ridiculous torture scenes he goes through at the hands of Ramsay Bolton, which are just painful to even think about, psychologically and, physically, obviously being dismembered and castrated and all this stuff. But, there's a model of kind of CBT for trauma called cognitive processing therapy. And they talk about the main themes that are affected by someone who's experienced trauma: trust, safety, power and control, intimacy, and esteem, self-esteem, or feelings towards others. And obviously here's a guy who has just, his identity has been decimated. He doesn't trust himself. He obviously shouldn't be trusting anybody else. He has no reason to feel safe anywhere because he, more than anybody perhaps, has not been physically safe, has been violated in every way. He has completely lost any sense of self-efficacy and sense of empowerment or control, so to the point where he is forced to take on this completely weak and disempowered identity of Reek that Ramsay sort of foists onto him, and he just becomes this subservient guy who's just, he can't even look anyone in the eye, if you remember. And actually, if I think about it, Alfie Allen's playing of Theon, the acting of it is actually really, really good. I mean, the arc of his character from being this kind of arrogant, bullying big brother type to this just Reek who's just dissociated and so traumatized. And he kind of comes back around towards the end in season 7. It's really, really well acted, but you could see those major themes of trauma through the lens of cognitive processing therapy that Theon goes through. I also think it's interesting. It really is an arc, because here's a guy who, again, we're introduced to him as this kind of like, arrogant guy who's got a chip on his shoulder. He's insecure. He's raised in the Stark household, so you could say with a relative amount of privilege. And he has a father figure in Ned Stark as well. He's actually treated better by Lady Catelyn than Jon Snow is. And yet, he always knows he's second fiddle to Robb Stark, because he's not a Stark, he's a Greyjoy. And he's there as the ward to Ned Stark, not as Ned Stark's son. So similarly to Jon Snow, they both know they're outsiders. They're not first class, even though they're in the highborn Stark household. But Jon seems to be humbled by that. Theon is sort of he's insecure about it. He feels like he's got to earn respect through being a tough guy, or through womanizing, and even the women kind of make fun of him. I think he sleeps with Roz in the brothel, and she's like, "Well, you're not really a Stark," and he's like, "Oh, well, screw you," or whatever. And then later on, he makes a pass at this woman when he comes back to the Iron Islands, who ends up turning out to be his sister, and that's a face palm there for Theon. He gets seduced by Osha, who, she was a wildling too, right? Right, and that leads to Bran and Rickon being able to escape from, I think it's Winterfell at that point. So he doesn't help himself. And
he's not very bright.
He's not very bright. You don't feel for him at that point. Yeah. And yet, here's a guy who is struggling with his identity. There's a scene where he comes back to the Iron Islands to greet his father, Balon, and he's coming on boat by boat, and he sees the archway into the Iron Islands, and there's this look of hope and returning home to him. And obviously and then it's the whole, well, I'm Ironborn, I'm not a Stark, and then obviously he goes full blown with that and betrays the Starks and attacks Winterfell, and then falls into Ramsay's hands. So it's such a identity crisis for him. And it's a great scene with Theon and Jon at the end of season 7. Oh, it's so good, where Theon basically accosts Jon and to say, hey, we both came out of Winterfell, but I've screwed up, and you always seemed like you knew what the right thing to do was. And Jon's very humble about it. He says, "No, I guarantee you, I've done things I've regret too." And Theon says, "Well, I've done more that I regret." And Jon's like, "Yeah, that's fair enough." but Jon, I love how
I'm not going to give you a
I'll give you that. You've done more bad stuff than I have. But he says, it's not for me to forgive you what you've done, but what I can, I do. Oh, wow, what a healing words from this, And then he says, you don't have to choose. You're a Greyjoy and you're a Stark. You don't have to choose. And you can see the look on Theon's face. And I just think for anyone who has wrestled with some aspect of their identity, am I, for some people, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bisexual? Does it matter? Am I male, female? Am I non-binary? Is it okay to be both? Am I Asian or Asian American, or am I Asian American? Am I biracial? And here's a moment where Jon's words kind of help Theon integrate that you're just Theon. It's okay. You're Theon Greyjoy, but you can still be part of the Stark family. And that leads up to that last scene where he obviously kind of gathers up the fortitude and the strength and the courage to challenge that last Greyjoy leader. And they're saying, we're just going to go find an island and make that our own home and wait out this mess. And Theon, after having betrayed his sister and chickened out when he could have rescued her, he says he basically takes that guy out, pounds him into the beach, and says, for Yara, we're going to go save her. And all the 25 remaining Greyjoys rally behind him. So at this moment, this is the strongest he's ever been, but not just from insecure arrogance as he started at. He's really like, all right, I kind of know who I am. I have been humbled. I have come back from the dead. I'm trying to. It's a story of redemption, right? Where he's wrestling with his past sins. He didn't help his sister. He stabbed the Starks in the back. But now he's risking his life to help Sansa escape from Ramsay, and now he's trying to rescue his sister. So, now I feel like we're really rooting for him. Here's the guy now.
He's finally empowered.
Yeah, he's finally
it's about
empowered.
time.
Yeah, and I'm really, you're really behind him now. So, but it's really, if you think about it, remarkable. He hasn't been in therapy or anything, but but he's healing.
He just needed to hear those words from Jon.
He
those
needed
words of encouragement.
Yeah, I needed it from Jon, and I think Sansa actually helped too. Right. Like she helped when she got to Winterfell, kind of say, hey."
Yeah, she's like,
Theon.
snap out of it.
Yeah, come on. Like, what are you doing? And so it's a really rich arc, and
because they've all gone through stuff, and I think a big theme is just the resilience of all of the characters.
For sure. So I kind of feel like he starts out as a study in kind of what we call toxic masculinity, right? All right, he's like, I got to prove myself, and then here he is. He's become a man, if you will, a grown up in a good sense, but he's still got something to prove. So we'll see what happens. So that leads us into what are our predictions for season 8, which comes out in just a few weeks at this point. What are we anticipating? What do we think might happen? What are we looking forward to?
Man, that's tough. A few things that I can predict 100% is if there's something we don't want to happen, it's gonna happen. That seems to be the storytelling device. And again, that reminds me of exposure and response prevention, where a lot of anxiety comes from not wanting to deal with certain physical sensations because that could lead to a panic attack. But then you go through an exposure exercise and you see, like, okay, here is that situation, and I can handle it, and life will go on. And maybe George R.R. Martin has our best interest in mind, and he's trying to help us that way. So like whatever.
Or he just wants to profit off the sales of the book and your show. But no.
Yeah. So whatever we're afraid of happening, that's the thing that's going to happen. It's going to be certain that it wasn't just a dream; it really happened, and we'll just have to deal with it. That's my short answer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe Cersei might be killed by Jaime, since there was a prediction of
That's bold.
a younger, because he is technically younger brother.
What would the show be without Cersei, though?
I don't know, but
I
don't know. Maybe. I think she's got to go.
We'll see.
And then maybe him and Brienne will live happily ever after.
Well, it
seems like he has just a really sweet spot for her. I don't know.
So does
they connect on deeper levels. So they've been through a lot together. So
I think it's going to be interesting. At some point, someone's going to have to break the news to Jon and Daenerys. I don't know if it's going to be Bran or if it's going to be Samwell Tarly, but it's going to be one of these moments where it's like, oh. Or maybe they'll be like, well, hey, Jaime and Cersei, no big deal.
Sure.
And wasn't Tywin married to his cousin?
His cousin, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
So back then that was normal.
Not that big
I mean,
of a deal, maybe.
yeah, because Daenerys is his aunt, right?
Yeah.
The aunt. Yeah. So
Right.
I mean, aunt and nephew, cousins,
No big deal.
incest is incest. They all do it.
Yeah. And I do think Daenerys is going to die, and probably the dragons too.
Oh no! Oh no! I don't want that to happen. I thought Daenerys was going to take over.
My guess.
You think it's gonna happen?
It's too obvious for her to take over, huh?
Yeah,
it's probably too much of an obvious thing to happen.
Yeah, Daenerys has been slowly gaining more and more power, pretty much winning every important battle. I mean, up until last season. So it just doesn't seem fitting for her to keep winning and then live happily ever after.
This is not a happily ever after type of show.
No, it's not. It's certainly not.
Yeah. And then as far as the dragons, it seems like, one of the things that happens is history repeats itself. That's a big thing in Game of Thrones. So when the story starts, there's no dragons in the world. There's very little magic. And then as the dragons hatch and all that, there becomes more and more magic in the world. So then my guess is magic is going to go away again, if not forever, at least, for a long time. So sorry, dragons.
Sorry, dragons. I'm looking forward to, at some point, it's going to be 2-on-1, right? The two dragons on Daenerys' side are going to have to fight. Is it, which one became the White Walker? Is it Drogon or?
No. That's the one that Daenerys rides.
Oh, that's the one she rides, yeah. I don't remember the other's name.
The one that became a dragon was named after her brother Viserys. So it was like Viseron
or something. Right, that's right, yeah. That's going to be interesting. Yeah. The dragon brothers fighting each other. So that'll be dramatic, if you will. Yeah. At some point, there's going to be a showdown, I would think, between the Hound and the Mountain, his brother.
Yeah.
Who,
that's right.
Right? We you don't quite know what his face looks at this point. He's gone through this weird potion healing process, so he's as that whatever that weird doctor's name is.
Qyburn,
that's right. Like that. He says, it changes him, and it doesn't make him weaker. He's obviously probably stronger now. Yeah. And the Hound kind of went up and confronted him earlier. So that'll be interesting. Let's see what happens there. I wonder if Bran is going to take some sort of a bigger role. Just now he's the full-on... He's like when Neo becomes Neo, right? He's like, I am the three-eyed raven. I'm not just in training anymore. Like, the real one's dead, and I'm starting to see stuff. I'm the one guy who knew that Littlefinger put a knife to my father's neck. And but it's an interesting time because, it's not... If you think... It's like it ends... Season 7 ends on a high note for the Starks because Sansa, you think Sansa and Arya are kind of at odds, but then you realize, she finally got it together and realized Littlefinger is playing them all for fools, and then they take him out, and now Sansa, Arya, who's at her full might right now, and Bran, they have it all under control, and Winterfell's sort of unified. But at the same time, so Daenerys has Jon and they have Highgarden now, and they have the dragons, and they have the Unsullied and the Dothraki, so they're looking pretty strong. Cersei has she has the wealth of the bank, and they've I'm sorry, Cersei took over Highgarden, right? Because Jaime took Highgarden from what's her name, Lady
the Queen of Thorns,
she was, Lady Tyrell, that's right. So they have all the resources and the land and all that stuff. So those two sides are both very strong and resourced right now. But what does Winterfell have, really? And they're in closest proximity to the pending doom coming from the north. So I don't know. I feel like they're in a precarious situation. So
Winterfell has the Stark values and upbringing with
I don't think that's
a
worth
good
that
father.
Much in this world. So last question is, so whose death would we be most begrieved, that's a word, by, most affected by? Kristin sounds like Daenerys, that would be bothersome.
Well, actually, Tyrion. Tyrion first came to mind because he's such a likable character.
Yeah, you root for him.
He has a great sense of humor.
Yes.
He cares about others. He's the
underdog.
He's the underdog.
Perpetual underdog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be a huge loss.
That'd be tough. Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, that would suck. Tyrion might die. Tyrion. Oh, well, not for any particular reason that I know of, but just because lots of people are going to die.
They all might die at this point.
Yeah, because they're probably all going to die, or most of them. But Tyrion, a little backstory or back information. Tyrion is the character that George R.R. Martin relates to the most. Oh. So I kind of feel like George R.R. Martin sees himself as Tyrion, and that's him in the book. But for me, well, I would be really sad if Tyrion died. I wouldn't be that sad if Jon died. Jon's already died.
Already died and almost died 17 times at this point.
Yeah. So again, it's
desensitized at this point.
I'm desensitized to it. I've been through exposure therapy with Jon almost dying in every season and then actually dying in one. Yeah. So I wouldn't be that sad. And Jon also, I feel like if he died, it would be for a great reason. He would be saving all kinds of people. It would be on his terms. So I wouldn't be that sad if Jon died. I would be surprisingly sad, or maybe surprising for other people, if Ghost died. So that's Jon Snow's direwolf. And I think that's for a lot of reasons. If we just think about pets in general, we love our pets. They're innocent. We perceive them to love us unconditionally. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how we perceive things. At Whittier College, I do pet therapy events, and people love animals they don't even know. They just go up to them and pet them, and they feel calm. Their anxiety reduces. It's even good for blood pressure. So people have these really kind of important bonds with animals. And then Ghost is more than just a regular pet. He's an extension of Jon Snow. So they don't really spell it out in the show, but all of the Stark children are wargs. They can. That's how they control the direwolves, because they warg into them without even being aware of it. So Ghost really is truly an extension of Jon, and then they represent all the Stark values. They represent all the things that we love about these characters. So when they die, it's like it's the character dying too. So I would be really sad, or it's also like the most innocent and vulnerable part of the characters. So I would be very sad if Ghost died.
Mm-hmm. That's true, because it was pretty sad when they killed Sansa's
lady.
Lady.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Lady didn't do anything to deserve that.
Right. This is not a merit-based world that they're living in here.
Yeah.
That's true. Nobody ever really does it
right.
to deserve it necessarily.
That's right.
And then when Lady died, that was pretty much Sansa's connection to the Stark family, and the Stark way of life was just cut. After that, she's angry at Ned. She never gets along with Arya again until the final season. She wants to marry Joffrey, and then things go very downhill for her at that point. So yeah, when Lady died, that was a
pivotal point.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then also Sir Pounce. Sir Pounce was King Tommen's pet cat. And,
Boy, this one has gone under my radar.
You're really reaching.
I don't know what happened. We don't know what happened to him, but he's out there somewhere, and hopefully he's safe.
I hope so too.
I'm curious what's going to happen, because there was all this talk about mining the Dragonstone, right? To make, I assume, weapons, which... What is it? At Dragonstone, it's Valyrian steel or fire. The only things that can kill the White Walkers. Or dragon glass.
As far as the White Walkers, we know it's Valyrian steel and the dragon glass.
Right.
And then as far as the whites, those zombies, then I think it's fire.
That's right, because they kill the one that almost takes out Chief Mormont. Yeah. So that's kind of in the background, but they didn't say at the end of season 7, like, what are they doing with it? They're mining it, but have they started producing weapons and swords? And so, you're going up against this building force that has just blown through the wall. I'm just, do they all know what it's going to take? So I'm just curious about that. And as far as, I'm not sure. I have to think about how I'll feel about it, but I don't know what's going to happen with Arya, because she's become a great warrior, and she's overcome a lot of adversity, and now she's gone through what is it, Pentos and the Jaqen Nagar.
Right, I think it was Bravos. But yeah,
Bravos, yeah. And you can change faces and all that. So that's a pretty useful skill, if you will. But how is that going to be useful? Will she be? Maybe she'll be able to infiltrate the White Walkers, and I don't know. I mean, she took out Walder Frey and that whole house, but that was a great scene, by the way. I was like, what is going on here?
Because she has a list, so is she still going down a
Go
list?
down the list.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen there?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to be interested because I'm rooting for her. At the same time, like, well, there's also other fish to fry here at this point that everyone else is on board with. So, yeah, a lot will be revealed in pretty short time.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, right. So, so season 8 of Game of Thrones comes out in
April 14th.
Oh, me, geez.
It's the day before my birthday.
Oh,
so
nice.
Didn't cue that. So we know what you're going to be doing the day before your birthday.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly, of course.
All right. And I hope I'll be able to edit this and put it up way before then so people can listen to it and give us any feedback. But Kristin, Jason, thanks for sharing your thoughts, and I'm glad we can be co-conspirators, fans of the show. It's just it's obviously there's so much to it that if you just look at it at face value, it's like, oh god, it's awful, and violence and blood and dragons and nudity and sex and backstabbing. But really, there's a lot of rich storylines and interesting things that happen that are good to think about, just as viewers, fans, but kind of as mental health professionals. So, anyways, thanks for chatting about it. So,
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was fun.